The Bellagio glittered with lights and laughter until the ground shook, marble columns cracked and panic spread. Las Vegas. A night of luxury at the Bellagio turned into chaos when part of the casino collapsed. Thousands of guests, tourists and staff found themselves trapped under dust, debris and ruin. When others fled, one call went out: USAR. Their mission was simple but deadly: enter the ruins, find survivors, and pull them out before the building claimed more lives. If you believe stories of courage should be told, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The neon lights of the Strip painted the Nevada desert in brilliant colors, and inside the Bellagio Hotel and Casino, the night was alive with possibility. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over polished marble floors where hundreds of guests moved between poker tables, slot machines, and roulette wheels. The famous fountain outside danced to classical music, its water reaching toward the stars, while inside, champagne flutes clinked and dice rolled across green felt. Marcus Rivera had seen it all before, but tonight felt different. As the head of Nevada's urban search and rescue team, he wasn't here for the gambling or the shows. He was finishing a routine safety inspection of the building's emergency protocols, something required for all major Vegas venues. His team had spent the evening reviewing evacuation routes, checking emergency lighting, and ensuring that the Bellagio's massive structure could handle any crisis. "All good down here, Marcus," came the voice of Sarah Chen, his second-in-command, through his radio. She was checking the lower levels while he walked the main casino floor. "Emergency exits are clear. Backup power systems are operational." Marcus nodded, watching a family from Ohio celebrate a jackpot at a nearby slot machine. A young couple from Japan posed for selfies in front of the glass conservatory. An elderly man in a tuxedo dealt cards with the practiced precision of decades. These weren't just tourists or gamblers to him, they were people living their moments of joy, unaware that in less than an hour, their lives would depend on his team's training. The Bellagio held nearly 10,000 souls on a busy Friday night like this. Guests in their rooms, staff moving through service corridors, visitors admiring the botanical gardens, diners in world-class restaurants. Marcus had memorized every floor plan, every structural detail, every potential weakness. It was his job to know how to get people out when everything went wrong. But as he completed his final notes and headed toward the exit, Marcus had no idea that tonight would test every skill he'd learned in 20 years of rescue work. The building around him seemed solid as a mountain, its marble columns and steel framework designed to last centuries. The laughter and music filled the air with a sense of invincibility. In 12 minutes, that sense of safety would shatter like glass. It started as a tremor, so subtle that most people didn't notice. The crystal in the chandeliers tinkled softly, a sound almost lost in the casino's symphony of slots and conversation. Marcus felt it first in his boots, a vibration that didn't belong, a frequency that made his trained instincts suddenly alert. He stopped walking and placed his hand against the nearest marble column. There it was again, stronger this time. Not an earthquake, Nevada got those, but this felt different, structural, internal. "Sarah, you feeling anything down there?" He spoke into his radio, his voice calm but focused. "Yeah, actually. Thought it was just the..." Her words were cut off by a sound that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. The groan of steel under stress, deep, resonant, like a giant awakening in pain. Around the casino floor, conversations began to pause. A woman at the blackjack table looked up at the ceiling, her cards forgotten in her hands. The dealer followed her gaze, his professional smile wavering. The sound came again, louder now, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as he recognized what he was hearing: load-bearing support failure. "Everyone remain calm," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of his profession. But even as he spoke, hairline cracks appeared in the marble column beside him, spiderwebbing upward toward the ornate ceiling. The Bellagio had been built to withstand almost anything: earthquakes, high winds, even terrorist attacks. But sometimes the unthinkable happened. Sometimes age and stress and 1,000 tiny factors combined in ways no engineer could predict. Sometimes buildings that seemed eternal proved they were only made of steel and stone and human dreams. The chandeliers began to sway more noticeably now. Dust rained down from somewhere above, catching in the golden light like snow. Marcus pulled out his phone, already dialing the emergency protocols that would summon every rescue team in Clark County. "This is Marcus Rivera, USAR team leader. We have a potential structural emergency at the Bellagio Hotel and Casino. I need immediate evacuation support and..." The world exploded into chaos. A section of the ceiling gave way with a roar like thunder, sending tons of debris crashing onto the casino floor. Screams erupted from every direction as people dove for cover, mothers grabbing children, couples clutching each other, staff running toward emergency exits that suddenly seemed impossibly far away. Marcus found himself on the ground, his ears ringing, dust and smoke filling his lungs. When he looked up, the beautiful casino had become a war zone. The Bellagio's grand casino floor, moments before a showcase of human joy and luxury, had transformed into something from a nightmare. Where there had been carpet and marble, now chunks of concrete and twisted metal created treacherous terrain. The magnificent chandeliers that had sparkled like stars now lay shattered across overturned gaming tables, their crystal fragments catching emergency lighting in a grotesque parody of their former beauty. Marcus pushed himself to his feet, his training taking over despite the chaos around him. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow, but his focus was laser sharp. He could hear Sarah's voice crackling through his radio, barely audible over the screams and the continuous groaning of damaged structure above. "Marcus! Marcus, respond! The south corridor is blocked. We've got people trapped down here." All around him, the scene unfolded like a disaster movie, except this was terrifyingly real. A middle-aged woman sat crying beside a pile of rubble, calling out for her husband, who had been standing beside her just moments before. A teenager helped an elderly man navigate around fallen debris, both of them covered in white dust that made them look like ghosts. Staff members in their crisp uniforms, now torn and dirty, tried to guide guests toward what remained of the emergency exits. But Marcus could see what many of them couldn't. The structural damage was extensive, and this was likely just the beginning. Cracks ran up the walls like lightning, and somewhere above, he could hear the ominous sound of more steel bending beyond its limits. "Listen to me!" he shouted, his voice carrying over the panic. "Everyone move toward the main entrance. Stay away from the walls and ceilings. Staff, help guide people out, but don't run. Watch for falling debris." A young casino dealer, his black vest torn and his face pale with shock, approached Marcus. "Sir, there are people trapped under that section." He pointed to where one of the massive chandeliers had created a cave-in near the poker tables. "I can hear them calling for help." Marcus's heart clenched, but he knew the protocols. "We'll get them out, but we need the right equipment. Are you hurt?" "No, sir, just shaken up." "Good. Help me get a count of who's missing and where they might be. Every second counts now." As if to emphasize his words, another deep groan echoed through the building, and more dust rained down from above. Marcus could see fear in every face around him, but he also saw something else. People helping strangers, staff members risking their own safety to guide others to exits, humanity at its best in the worst of circumstances. His radio crackled again. "Marcus, this is command. We've got full USAR teams en route, ETA 8 minutes. Fire department is already positioning outside." 8 minutes. In a building that might not stand for another 8 minutes, with people trapped under tons of debris, 8 minutes felt like an eternity. But Marcus Rivera had been preparing for this moment his entire career, and he knew that when the cavalry arrived, they would need every piece of information he could gather. He began moving through the chaos, noting locations, assessing damage, and preparing for the most important rescue operation of his life. Outside the Bellagio, the Las Vegas Strip had transformed from a river of neon and celebration into a scene of controlled chaos. Emergency vehicles lined the street, their red and blue lights reflecting off the glass facades of neighboring hotels. Fire trucks positioned themselves strategically while paramedics set up triage stations in the shadow of the famous fountains that still danced, oblivious to the disaster unfolding just yards away. Marcus emerged from the building covered in dust and debris, his radio in constant communication with the incoming teams. Behind him, a steady stream of survivors continued to evacuate, many supporting each other, all bearing the shock of having faced mortality in what should have been a place of entertainment. USAR Team Alpha, this is Rivera on scene. He spoke into his radio while surveying the building's exterior. Even from outside, he could see the structural damage. Windows cracked in spiderweb patterns, sections of the facade showing stress fractures. I need immediate entry teams with search equipment. We've got an estimated 40 to 60 people still inside, many trapped under debris. The response came from Captain James Walsh, a 20-year veteran Marcus had worked with on countless disasters. Copy that, Marcus. We're 3 minutes out with full urban rescue gear. What's the structural assessment? Marcus looked up at the towering building that had been an icon of the Strip for decades. Engineers would later determine the exact cause, a combination of minor ground settling, aging support structures, and the incredible weight of the building's ornate features. But right now, all that mattered was that people were dying inside. Partial collapse on the main casino level, structural integrity compromised, but building is still standing. We need to move fast. I'm hearing secondary failures throughout the structure. As if to punctuate his words, they could all hear another rumble from within the building, and several windows on the upper floors suddenly cracked. Tourists and staff who had made it out safely huddled together behind the emergency barriers, many of them looking back at the building with expressions of disbelief and trauma. The first USAR truck arrived with a roar of diesel engines and the squeal of air brakes. The team that emerged looked like something between firefighters and soldiers. Helmets with mounted lights, heavy protective gear, oxygen tanks, and equipment designed for the most dangerous rescue work imaginable. These were the people who entered buildings when everyone else was running out, who crawled through collapsed structures to find signs of life, who risked everything to save strangers. Sarah Chen was among them, her face grim but determined. She approached Marcus immediately. What do we know? Main casino floor has significant collapse, but there are pockets where people are trapped but alive. I've identified at least 3 priority areas where we heard voices before I had to evacuate for the team entry. The USAR protocol was precise and practiced. Within minutes, they had established a command post, set up communication systems, and divided into specialized teams: search and rescue, medical support, structural assessment, and emergency extraction. Each person knew their role. Each had trained for scenarios exactly like this one. But training was one thing. Walking into a building that could collapse at any moment, knowing that people were counting on you to reach them before time ran out, that was something else entirely. Marcus checked his gear one final time: helmet secure, radio functioning, rescue equipment tested. Around him, his team was doing the same preparation ritual they'd performed dozens of times before. But none of them had ever walked into anything quite like the Bellagio. "All right, people," he called to his team. "We go in fast, we go in smart, and we bring everyone home. Let's move." The entrance to the Bellagio that had welcomed millions of visitors with marble and gold now looked like the mouth of a cave. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through the dust-filled air, and the sound of their boots on debris-covered floors echoed in spaces that had once been filled with music and laughter. Marcus led his team through what remained of the main lobby, their helmet-mounted lights cutting through the haze like lightsabers in the darkness. Behind him, Sarah Chen carried the specialized listening equipment that could detect voices or tapping from beneath tons of rubble. Two other team members, Rodriguez and Thompson, hauled the hydraulic tools that could move concrete slabs and bent steel beams. The scene inside was worse than Marcus had feared during his initial assessment. What had been a partial collapse from the outside revealed itself as a complex maze of fallen ceiling sections, overturned furniture, and precarious debris piles that could shift at any moment. The famous conservatory was buried under chunks of concrete, its exotic flowers and plants, now crushed beneath the weight of architectural failure. "Command, this is Team Alpha," Marcus spoke into his radio. "We're inside and beginning systematic search. Structural damage is extensive, but we have stable pathways to the main collapse zones." Through his earpiece came the voice of the incident commander. "Copy, Alpha. Structural engineers estimate you have maybe 30 minutes before secondary collapse risk becomes critical. Work fast. 30 minutes to find and extract dozens of people from a building that could become their tomb." Marcus had faced impossible odds before, but never with this many lives at stake. "Sarah, start with Sector 7. That's where I heard the clearest voices before evacuation," he directed his team, pointing toward what had been the high-limit poker area. Now it was a cavern of twisted metal and fallen marble, but somewhere in that chaos, people were waiting for rescue. As they approached the first debris pile, Sarah raised her hand for silence. The team froze, holding their breath, and activated the sensitive listening equipment. For several seconds, there was nothing but the distant groan of stressed steel and the hum of emergency systems. Then they heard it. A tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short. "SOS. Got them," Sarah whispered, her eyes lighting up with the fierce joy that came with finding life in the midst of destruction. "Sounds like multiple people, maybe 20 feet down and to the left." Marcus began assessing the debris pile that stood between them and the survivors. Concrete slabs the size of dining room tables leaned against each other in a precarious balance. Steel beams protruded at odd angles, and somewhere in the middle, a space just large enough for people to survive. If they hadn't been injured, if the air was still reaching them, if the structure didn't shift while the rescue team worked. Rodriguez was already setting up the hydraulic spreaders, tools powerful enough to move multi-ton pieces of debris with precision. Thompson prepared the stabilization equipment that would prevent the rescue itself from causing a secondary collapse. "Okay, people," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "This is what we trained for. Slow and steady, every move calculated. We're going to get them out." As they began the delicate work of moving debris piece by piece, Marcus couldn't help but think about the people trapped below, their fear, their hope, their absolute dependence on his team's skill and courage. The work was methodical, dangerous, and heartbreaking. Each piece of debris removed revealed the scope of the destruction. Casino chips scattered like confetti, a woman's evening purse crushed under concrete, a child's toy that someone had been carrying as a lucky charm. These weren't just objects. They were fragments of lives interrupted, dreams paused, stories that might never be finished. Marcus wiped sweat from his eyes, the salt-stinging cuts he didn't even remember getting. Around him, his team worked with the precision of surgeons and the strength of construction workers. Every movement had to be calculated. Shift the wrong piece of debris, and the entire pile could come down on both the survivors and the rescuers. "We're making progress," Sarah reported, her voice tight with concentration. "The tapping is getting louder and I'm hearing voices now. Sounds like at least 4 people, maybe more." Through the small gaps they'd created in the debris pile, Marcus could see movement, a flash of fabric, a hand reaching through the darkness. Hope and terror warred in his chest as he realized how close they were getting. "Hello down there," he called through one of the openings. "This is Las Vegas Urban Search and Rescue. We're getting you out." The response was immediate. Voices calling back, weak but determined. A woman's voice, shaky but clear. "There are 6 of us down here. 1 man is hurt bad. He's unconscious. 6 people, 1 seriously injured." And somewhere above them, Marcus could hear the continuous groaning of a building that was fighting to stay upright. The emergency lighting flickered occasionally, reminding them all that power systems were failing throughout the structure. Rodriguez looked up from the hydraulic spreader, sweat streaming down his face. "This next section is the big one, boss. If we can get that main beam shifted, we'll have a clear extraction path." Marcus nodded, but his trained eye could see the problem. The beam Rodriguez indicated was supporting a massive concrete slab above it. Move it wrong, and tons of debris would come crashing down, but leave it in place, and the trapped survivors would die waiting for rescue. "Command, this is Alpha Team," he spoke into his radio. "We need structural assessment on a major beam removal. Are the engineers monitoring our sector?" The response came back immediately. "Alpha, structural team advises extreme caution. Building integrity is deteriorating faster than projected. You've got maybe 15 minutes before mandatory evacuation. 15 minutes to move tons of debris, extract 6 people, and get everyone out safely." Marcus looked at his team, Rodriguez with his hands on the hydraulic controls, Sarah monitoring for signs of life, Thompson preparing the medical equipment they'd need for the unconscious survivor. If this story has you hooked so far, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in their place. In the silence that followed the command center's warning, Marcus made the decision that would define his career and possibly his life. They had come too far to abandon these people now. Somewhere in the darkness below, 6 human beings were counting on them to defy the odds, to risk everything, to be the thin line between life and death. "We're going for it," he announced to his team. "Rodriguez, start the extraction. Sarah, keep monitoring for any changes in their condition. Thompson, be ready to move fast once we have access." As the hydraulic spreader began to push against tons of concrete and steel, Marcus Rivera prepared to either save 6 lives or die trying. The hydraulic spreader groaned under the immense pressure, its mechanical whine almost drowned out by the protesting sounds of the building itself. Marcus watched with held breath as Rodriguez worked the controls with surgical precision, applying force incrementally to avoid triggering a catastrophic shift in the debris pile. "Easy, easy," Sarah murmured, monitoring the listening equipment for any change in the survivors' condition. "They're still talking down there, but I'm hearing stress in their voices. They know we're close." Through the widening gap, Marcus could now see more clearly into the pocket where the 6 people had survived the initial collapse. It was a miracle of physics. 2 fallen ceiling beams had created a triangular space just large enough for human beings to exist, protected by pure chance from the tons of debris that surrounded them. A middle-aged man in a torn business suit was the first face Marcus saw clearly. Behind him, a young couple held each other tightly, the woman's evening dress torn and dusty, but her eyes bright with hope. An elderly casino patron sat with his back against a chunk of concrete, and there in the corner, motionless, was the unconscious man they'd mentioned. A casino dealer still wearing his vest, blood visible on his forehead. "Sir, can you hear me?" Marcus called down to the man in the business suit, who appeared to be the most alert of the group. "Yes, God, yes, we can hear you," came the reply, the man's voice cracking with emotion. "We've been trapped for over an hour. Jerry here, he got hit when the ceiling came down. He's been out cold, and we don't know how bad he's hurt." Thompson was already preparing the medical extraction equipment, a specialized backboard designed to immobilize spinal injuries during rescue operations, along with oxygen and basic trauma supplies. But getting the equipment down to the survivors and then getting them all back up through the narrow gap would require removing even more debris. "Command, Alpha Team," Marcus radioed. "We have visual contact with 6 survivors, 1 unconscious with probable head trauma. Continuing extraction." The response crackled back immediately. "Alpha, structural integrity is failing rapidly. You have 8 minutes to complete extraction and exit the building." 8 minutes. Marcus looked at the debris, still blocking their path, calculated the time needed to safely extract 6 people, including 1 who would need to be carried, and realized they were facing an impossible timeline. But as he looked down at the faces staring up at him with desperate hope, he knew there was no choice. "Rodriguez, we need to move faster," he decided. "Sarah, get down there and assess the injured man while we create a bigger opening." Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the medical kit and squeezed through the opening they'd created, dropping down into the survival pocket with the grace of someone who had done this countless times before. Marcus watched as she immediately began checking the unconscious dealer's pulse and breathing, her movements professional and confident. "Pulse is strong. Breathing is steady," she reported. "Looks like a concussion, possible skull fracture, but he's stable enough to move if we're careful." The business-suited man, who had introduced himself as David from Chicago, was helping coordinate the other survivors. "What do you need us to do?" Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the man's composure under pressure. "Stay calm, help each other, and be ready to move fast when we give the word. We're going to get you out of here." As Rodriguez increased the pressure on the hydraulic spreader and more debris began to shift, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing not just against time, but against the building's determination to claim more victims before they could escape. Above them, the groaning of stressed steel was getting louder. The opening was finally wide enough. Sarah had rigged the unconscious dealer with the spinal immobilization equipment, and Thompson was positioned to help lift him up through the gap. The other 5 survivors had organized themselves with the efficiency of people who had faced death together and found strength in cooperation. "All right, listen carefully," Marcus called down to them. "We're going to bring everyone up one at a time. The injured man goes first, then the elderly gentleman, then the lady, then the young man, then David, and finally Sarah. No sudden movements, no panic. We've done this before." What he didn't mention was that they'd never done it in a building that was actively failing around them. The emergency lighting had started to flicker more frequently, and through his radio he could hear increasing urgency in the command center's communications with other teams throughout the building. Thompson lowered the rescue harness down to Sarah, who had positioned herself under the unconscious dealer's shoulders. "Jerry," she spoke to the unconscious man as if he could hear her, "we're getting you out of here. Your co-workers are worried about you." The extraction of the first survivor was agonizingly slow. Every movement had to be controlled to prevent spinal injury, every inch upward carefully monitored. Marcus found himself holding his breath as Jerry's unconscious form was lifted through the narrow opening, Rodriguez and Thompson working together to bring him to safety. "One down, 5 to go," Sarah called up, already helping the elderly casino patron get into position for the next lift. That's when they heard it, a sound that made everyone freeze. Not the groaning of steel or the crack of concrete, but something worse. The rumble of a major structural failure somewhere else in the building, followed by the distant sound of debris crashing down. Marcus's radio exploded with chatter. "Command, this is Team Beta. We've got a major collapse in the East Wing. Multiple casualties. Need immediate medical." "All teams, this is Command," came the response. "Building evacuation is now mandatory. All rescue operations must conclude in 4 minutes." 4 minutes. Marcus looked down at the 5 people still trapped below, their faces turned up toward him with absolute trust. David, the businessman who had kept everyone calm. The young couple who reminded Marcus of his own daughter and her boyfriend. The elderly man who had probably survived wars and now faced this final test. And Sarah, his second in command, who would never leave them behind. "Marcus," came Sarah's voice from below, steady but urgent. "We need to speed this up." Rodriguez was already lowering the harness for the elderly man. "Come on, sir, let's get you topside." Marcus made a decision that went against every safety protocol he'd ever learned. "Rodriguez, Thompson, you two take Jerry and get him to medical immediately. Sarah and I will extract the remaining survivors." "Sir, protocol states," Thompson began. "Protocol is out the window," Marcus cut him off. "Those people down there are counting on us. Go. That's an order." As his 2 team members carried the injured dealer toward the exit, Marcus took over the hydraulic controls himself. Above them, the building continued to groan and shift, dust raining down continuously now. But in the pocket below, 5 human beings waited for salvation, and Marcus Rivera had never left anyone behind. He wasn't about to start now. Working alone with Sarah in the survival pocket, Marcus pushed the extraction pace to its absolute limit. The elderly casino patron, whose name was Frank and who had been visiting from Arizona, came up next. Despite his age, he moved with surprising agility, his hands steady on the harness, his face calm with the acceptance of someone who had lived through enough to know that panic helped no one. "Thank you, son," Frank said simply as Marcus helped him clear the opening. "There are good people down there counting on you." The young couple came up together, the woman first, then her boyfriend, who refused to leave until he knew she was safe. Marcus could see the love between them, strengthened by facing mortality together, and it reminded him why this work mattered. It wasn't about protocols or procedures, it was about preserving the connections that made life worth living. "Command, Alpha Team," Marcus radioed as he prepared to bring up David, the businessman who had kept everyone organized. 4 survivors extracted, 2 remaining plus team member. "Alpha, building stress indicators are in critical range. You have 90 seconds to clear the structure." 90 seconds. Marcus looked down at David and Sarah, knowing that even under perfect conditions, extracting 2 people safely would take at least 3 minutes. But as he met David's eyes, he saw not fear, but determination. "Get Sarah up first," David called up to him. "She's got kids who need her home." "David, no," Sarah began. "That's not how this works," Marcus interrupted them both. "You both come up together. Sarah, grab the secondary harness." It was dangerous. Extracting 2 people simultaneously through a narrow opening with debris still threatening to shift. But Marcus had spent 20 years learning to make impossible decisions under pressure, and right now, leaving anyone behind was not an option. Sarah rigged herself with the backup harness, while David secured himself with the primary system. "Marcus," Sarah called up, "whatever happens, this has been an honor working with you." "Save the speeches for the retirement party," Marcus replied, engaging the hydraulic lift system. "We're all getting out of here." As the 2 forms began to rise through the opening, Marcus felt the building shudder around him. Somewhere above, he could hear the sound of windows shattering and steel beams shifting. Emergency alarms were sounding throughout the structure, and his radio was alive with evacuation orders from the command center. David emerged first, Marcus grabbing his arms and pulling him clear of the debris, Sarah was right behind him, her face streaked with dust and sweat, but her eyes bright with the triumph of a successful mission. "That's 6 lives, Marcus," she said as they began moving toward the exit. 6 people who get to go home tonight. But Marcus wasn't celebrating yet. Around them, the Bellagio was dying, its death throes growing stronger with each passing second. They had maybe 30 seconds to cover the distance between their position and the exit, navigating through debris fields and around structural hazards. "Move! Move! Move!" he shouted, leading his team and the survivors toward daylight. Behind them, with a roar like thunder, another section of the casino ceiling came crashing down, sealing off the area where they had been working just moments before. The desert air of Las Vegas had never tasted so sweet. As Marcus, Sarah, and David emerged from the dying Bellagio, they were met by paramedics, incident commanders, and the controlled chaos of a major rescue operation. Emergency vehicles filled the strip, their lights painting the famous hotels in red and blue, while medical teams worked to treat the dozens of survivors who had been pulled from the wreckage. Jerry, the unconscious dealer, was being loaded into an ambulance, his vital signs stable and his prognosis good. Frank, the elderly casino patron, sat on a gurney receiving oxygen, but refusing to leave until he knew everyone else was safe. The young couple held each other while paramedics checked them over, their love having survived not just the building collapse, but the terrifying ordeal of rescue. David, the businessman from Chicago, found Marcus by the command post where incident reports were being filed and radio communications coordinated. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice still shaky from the adrenaline and shock. "You and your team, you saved our lives." Marcus looked back at the Bellagio, where other USAR teams were still conducting final sweeps to ensure no one remained inside. The building stood, damaged but not destroyed, a testament to both engineering and the fragility of human constructions. By morning, structural engineers would begin the complex process of determining whether it could be repaired or would need to be demolished. "That's what we do," Marcus replied simply. "That's what we've trained for." Sarah appeared beside them, her gear still covered in dust from the collapsed casino. Final count is 63 people evacuated, 8 with serious injuries, but all stable, no fatalities. No fatalities. In a disaster that could have claimed hundreds of lives, the combination of good emergency planning, quick response, and the courage of people who ran toward danger instead of away from it had meant the difference between tragedy and triumph. Later, when the reports were filed and the equipment was cleaned and the team was back at headquarters, Marcus would think about the moments that defined a person's life. Not the quiet moments or the routine ones, but the times when everything hung in the balance and you had to decide who you really were. Tonight, the Bellagio had tested not just the structural integrity of steel and concrete, but the strength of human character. And in both cases, what had seemed solid had proven fragile, while what had seemed ordinary, a businessman organizing strangers, an elderly man moving with calm dignity, a young couple finding strength in each other, rescuers risking everything for people they'd never met, had proven unbreakable. The Las Vegas Strip would rebuild. The Bellagio would rise again in some form. But the 63 people who walked out alive that night and the rescuers who brought them to safety would carry something more valuable than any casino jackpot. The knowledge that courage isn't a choice, it's a calling. If this story moved you, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share your thoughts in the comments.